Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today let's talk about 60 weight thread. What can we use it for? And let's do a little tiny rolled hem on a silk scarf. The 60 weight thread that I'm using today is from the Mettler company, and it's called Cerulean. It's 100% polyester. We can choose from 18 different colors, and they're in these great spools. And the spools have this bottom that flip down, so we can just take that bottom and pull it down, and it leaves a little space right along the bottom. And that space keeps our thread from going all over the place. When we're done, we're going to be able to just wrap that around and then finish wrapping it on that bottom. Push it closed, and it's going to stay put for us. And these spools hold 2,000 meters of thread, so they definitely are going to last a long time. A 60 weight thread is a thinner thread. This one is polyester, and that polyester does have some advantages. With that thread so fine, you barely see it in your seams. So it's really good for sewing lightweight fabrics. You can use it at the top of the machine. You can also put it in your bobbin. So you're going to get a lot more in your bobbin than a heavier weight thread. You can use this in your serger. You can use it for a blind stitch, a paddle stitch. It really can be used for a lot of things. You can even use this for embroidery. If you have a finer fabric and you want to embroider on it, this thinner thread does work really, really well. When we look at the difference of the thread, the 60 weight versus the 50, you can see a difference. So this is the 60 weight thread, and this is a 50 weight thread. And when I cross them over, you can see that this thread is definitely thicker than this one. When we think about it, we have our top and bottom thread. So that is how much thread we are putting in each seam if we're using a 50 weight. If we're using a 60 weight thread, we have that top and bottom. You can see the difference of the thickness. So this can add a little bulk in the seam, where this is almost adding nothing in our seam. So a 60 weight thread definitely is a lot finer. It's great for bobbins, and it's great for quilting. It's definitely great for a serger, because with the serger we do have a lot of buildup. So this is going to give us less bulk in those serge seams. Doing an overlock, a zigzag, anything where we have a lot of threads combined together, the lighter 60 weight thread adds less bulk. And by using a polyester thread, we don't have to worry about it shrinking. It can be ironed, and it can be washed quite easily. When we are using a 60 weight thread for a fine fabric, I would recommend that we use a Microtech needle that is a sharp needle. And because I'm using a finer thread and a finer fabric, I will be using the smaller needle. So a 60 or even a 70. So the Cerulean polyester thread is great for sewing this very fine fabric. You can use the thread for making sheer curtains. You can use it for twill. What I'd like to do today is make this tiny little rolled hem on a silk scarf. So I do have this silk fabric, and I need to put a hem on it. Now we can put a hem on it with a serger and do a serge stitch. We could do a satin stitch, but I do like the look of these tiny little rolled hems, and they're not that hard to do. I do not want to leave this selvage in my seam. It will wash different than the main body of the thread, so it's important that we don't use that. But instead of cutting it off right at the beginning, I would rather just draw a line. I have a line on this fabric, but this one I don't have a line, so I could draw a line. So I would have this line go all the way around the fabric that I want to hem. I will be using my foot 1D. It is considered a reverse pattern foot. It has a nice large surface, and I'm going to be able to use that straight stitch and my dual feed. I do like that thicker, flatter bed for sewing this fabric. I do have my cerulean thread in the bobbin and in the top. Now, every fabric is going to be a little bit different. You do not want your fabric to gather as you're stitching, so you might need to tighten the tension or loosen the tension depending on your fabric. And in my case, I have changed my tension to a 4. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the edge of this foot and follow this print of the fabric. If you don't have an edge to follow, this is where you would have that drawn line. Now the fabric is a little bit slippery, so we're going to need to control it a little bit with our hands. So we're going to be able to just put our hand in the front and the back, and we're going to move our hands the same speed as we're stitching. So I'm just holding the back and I'm holding the front. I'm following the edge. And if you need to, you can just tug slightly if you find it's still gathering a little bit. So I'm going to stitch all the way around using the edge as the guide. So that is the stitch all the way around the edge. Now there is a reason that I have done just a flat stitch without rolling this hem first. This little row of stitching stabilizes the fabric and is going to help us with the rolled hem. It is the area that we're going to fold and iron. So we're going to take this to the iron first, and we're still going to leave all of this extra fabric on. It's just easier to maneuver, it's easier to hold, and it's just easier to work with. We're going to trim all of this off after. The iron does need to be set at your silk setting, and you can have steam or not steam. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold right along that stitch line. So I'm going to fold that fabric going towards the back. And I'm ironing right where I did that row of stitching. So that little row of stitching and the ironing is really going to set this up for success. Now, if you'd like, you can add some starch as you were doing this. I love the extra starch just to stiffen this up a little bit so it's not so wiggly. You can also use a starch alternative. Depending on your fabric, you might need a pressing cloth, but I'm fine with this fabric. And the fabric wants to fold along that stitching line. So I'm going to press all the way around. When I've pressed the corners, I've pressed the one side and then I folded that back and pressed that second side. You can see how much easier this is handling this fabric than trying to handle a very small seam allowance. The next thing we need to do is do one more rolled edge. So I'm going to roll that fabric over so I have a tiny, tiny little seam, and I'm going to press it. I'm going to do that all the way around. To press that corner, once I've come to that edge, I'm opening up the fabric and I'm pressing the next side. So I'm going to just be very careful where I'm pressing right here in that corner. I don't want to unpress that back side. Now that all this pressing is done, I'm going to be able to open it up and trim off all of that extra. When I open up the fabric, I'm going to be able to trim it on the first fold line closest to this raw edge. So when we're looking really close, the first thing I did was pressed along that seam line, pressed over one more time, and now I'm going to be able to trim off that extra. I just want to make sure that I trim so that I have enough fabric for it to roll over. And that press line will give me the guidance. Just fold over these corners, press. Now I can go to the machine and do a nice little stitch all the way around the edge. So there is that tiny little rolled seam. Along that edge is that first row of stitching, which stabilized it and gave me the pressing line. And then right along the edge was that second row of stitching. Now, of course, if you have a rolled edged foot, you can always use that. But with this beautiful silk fabric, a nice fine cerulean thread, I really did like this couture look. So that cerulean thread was the perfect thread to finish this silk scarf. It gives it a beautiful look. You really don't see those stitches. They just blend right into the fabric. And I now have my silk scarf finished and ready to go. The 60 weight thread is great for all fine fabrics, but it's also great for quilting. So keep that in mind. I do hope you liked today's episode on my couture scarf. Thanks for joining me today. Bye for now.